And welcome back to Nzone Focus. Our guest on the programme is former Green MP, Sue Bradford. I guess you're going to have to get used to that, being former MP.
Yeah, it'll take a little while.
we mentioned those arrests. Was it 30 or 40 arrests?
I've got no idea how many, yes, but it's a lot.
The first time you were picked up by the police at a protest, you were in your teens still, weren't you?
I was 16. I was part of a group of students from Auckland University who occupied the American consulate in 1969.
So this would have been Vietnam.
That was part of the anti-Vietnam War mobilisations.
What was... I think back to when I was 16, the thought of being arrested would have terrified me.
Oh, it was pretty scary, yeah. And especially there was about 30 of us in the group, and I was the only one that was underage, so I had to go to the youth court and have the welfare visiting the family home, which did not go down very well, I can tell you. So it was all quite difficult, because I would have been much happier if I'd been in the adult group. So it was a difficult experience, but you learn a lot being arrested and locked up. And I don't think you've ever had the honour. But it teaches you a lot about power and powerlessness, and you know what it's like losing all power and being locked up in the cells and searched and fingerprinted and in the system from then on.
Because I read somewhere that the people that you met when you were in Mount Eden Women's Prison on Remand was a life-changing experience in some ways.
It was certainly a very deep experience. I've just spent a couple of short periods in Mount Eden Women's. Well, it's not there anymore, but it used to be the remand section there. I learned as much there as I'd learn anywhere. Again, the opportunity to be with those women. And I guess that was part of my motivation with my Mothers with Babies in Prison bill, thinking about what happens for prisoners, though I had done work with prisoners before that as well.
What did your parents make of it? Because, I mean, your dad was a scientist, wasn't he?
Yeah.
I mean, you didn't, looking at where you came from, it's not the sort of standard background for a protester.
Well, I don't know if there's any standard background, but people who have radical politics come from all sorts of backgrounds. And my family certainly was interested in politics, but they weren't as left as I was and am. And they had a pretty hard time with it for a while.
I remember the trouble you got into when I think it was the one of the conference over in
Melbourne.
In Melbourne, and
in 2000, when Nandor Tantosh and I went over.
That's right.
I think it was the first time that any political party had sent its MPs off to demonstrate.
Well, it was something of a first.
Yeah, we got stopped by the Victoria Police, and they had horses in the demonstration. Very different demonstrations in here. That was quite an experience.
Because your relationship with the police is an interesting one. Is that a fair description?
Yeah, well, yes, they had an intense interest in me for some period. Yeah.
Was it difficult when you became, I guess, a poacher turned gamekeeper? You were suddenly part of the authorities. You were in Parliament, and you would have dealt with the police on a different sort of
I was
level.
amazed. I have been amazed over the last 10 years how many police or ex-police have come up to me and introduced themselves and said, "Oh, I used to see you, or I arrested you, or I something with you somewhere on a protest," and they always seem quite delighted to meet me again. And it's all very friendly, and it's quite interesting how the relationship changes when you're an MP.
Do you think that more MPs would benefit from having the sort of life experiences that you've had? Because a lot of them sort of come from they go to university, they have an academic or a business background, so haven't actually rubbed along with society in quite the same way that you have.
Oh, yes. When you go to Parliament, you take with you all the experiences of your life, and I've felt that very strongly. My experience as a mother of 5 children has meant a lot. My experience of having mental illness in my family and all around me. The experience of working for 16 years with unemployed people and beneficiaries and their families. And so on. All of that feeds in massively. My experience of having contact with prisoners quite a lot in different ways. And so on. That feeds your knowledge, and it's what's made me strong right through this period of remembering where I come from and trying to give voice for unemployed people, for low-wage workers, for people with mental illness in their families, for children, remembering where I come from and trying to represent that voice clearly and strongly in the Parliament, because I think people do forget. They forget about what it's like to be young, and they forget what or they simply don't know what it's like to be poor. Some of them. I mean, not all of them, but some of them.
One of the strange things is that probably 100 years ago, you would have been an activist in the church, because the church did those things. They were the people who gave voice to the voiceless and stuck up for the poor and the people who had no power. Do you think the church has perhaps lost sight of that particular area of its ministry, because there really wasn't anybody else doing what you were doing?
Oh, that's not quite right, actually. I mean, right through my work from 1983 onwards, we've worked very closely with a number of church people. And our unemployed group would not have survived without the support of particularly of the Methodist Church at Pitt Street in its early years. But many church people were part of our group, and I still work very closely with faith communities, because they are still, what you're talking about is of course a very strong strand within Christianity, and I've engaged with that very strongly because we share faith and values, and in the ways you're talking about. But you're right, in the 19th century or earlier, someone like me probably would have been a church person rather than a lay person. But now I think it's more a matter of, we often used to call ourselves heathens, but the church people and the heathens working together for common goals, and I still do that now, because it's a very powerful synergy.
Let's talk a bit about ACC, because that's very much in the news at the moment with the plans for privatisation.
Yes.
I guess with your experience in the people's movement, you'd think that was a bad thing.
Absolutely. I think that it's really shocking the direction that the government is going with ACC, and it's going very fast. It will be a disaster if they re-privatise or go even further with privatisation. But it's not just privatisation, it's cutting back entitlements for people. And a lot of people just think ACC's over there and doesn't matter until it affects them. And then if it affects them, and then suddenly they find that either they're not entitled to something, or the entitlement's been cut, or they're going to be pushed off into the benefit system or whatever, they'll realise how terrible it is what the government is doing.
Because the argument is
too late.
The argument is that they will make it more efficient, and therefore it will be better for everybody.
But that's not the case. The brief experience of partial privatisation that we had in the late 90s showed the opposite. It wasn't more efficient, it's more costly. And of course you're building this whole extra layer of cost in because of the profit that the insurance companies have to take out. It is an ideological question. If you think profit should be taken out of everything, I accept that some people believe that, but I come from a position that the more we can socialise and give access, a fair access to everybody, the fairer our society will be. Privatisation goes down the opposite route. What I'm most shocked by, though, has been the Māori Party's support for it. I cannot understand why the Māori Party would ever see any benefit in cutting entitlements and in privatisation for Māori people and Māori workers, because Māori workers tend to be disproportionately in the low-paid and more vulnerable section of the workforce.
Would you be frustrated that you're not in the Parliament to fight against it?
Yeah. It's a strange transition, because I regret the loss of the voice. I mean, I am deliberately choosing to leave Parliament and to lose the voice that I've had there, and that's hard. But I will also be continuing in politics, and over the next little while looking for where I can begin to use my voice again most effectively. And I'll certainly be engaged in that over the period ahead. So I hope you haven't seen the last of me.
No, I'm sure we haven't. We'll take another break, and we'll be back in a moment with our guest, Sue Bradford.